Hello, this is the Bite Weasel, and in this video we'll be continuing work on our Roblox Tycoon game. This time we'll be focused on how to start earning Robux using game passes and developer products. So by now, if you've been following along in the series, you'll know that we have quite a compelling Tycoon game. I mean, it's not perfect and it's rather short, but hopefully by the time that you've sort of followed along, you've sort of made a customized version of this that has many more buttons, many more droppers, new things to buy like cosmetics, and you have a really decent tycoon game. Okay? Because we have all the mechanics in here from the previous episodes. We have buttons that unlock one at a time that can buy upgraders or droppers. We have the ability to drop things from those droppers that could be a model imported from Blender. We have the ability to assign a value to those things, either from the dropper itself or when it passes through an upgrader. And, you know, when it gets to the end, it gets sold, you get money, you can load and save the game state. So if people quit halfway through and come back, they're still able to play. It's just got most of those mechanics in there. The one piece that's missing is the ability to start earning Robux. So let's think about how we could do that. So inside Roblox, if you're not familiar, there are kind of two different ways that a game can earn Robux. Um, one is with selling a game pass, and the other is with selling a developer product. Now, the difference between those two things is a game pass is sort of a permanent upgrade. So you would buy a game pass, such as becoming a VIP in a server, and then forevermore, whenever that player joins your game, they are a very important person within your game. So you buy a game pass once, and it's sort of there forever. A developer product is different. It's more like a consumable. So you can buy it again and again and again and again. And an example of that might be something like a health potion. You buy a health potion, you go away and you use it. And then if you want another health potion, you can go back and buy another one. So that's the difference. Game passes are permanent, developer products are consumable, and you can buy them more than once. Now, I'm going to show you how to do both within this tycoon, but it's going to be up to you to decide which ones you sort of want to use for your game and how they'll fit in with the theme or whatever you decide to do with the item that people buy, right? So let's start with the easier one. The easier of these two is a developer product. And I think it's because it's more modern. The APIs are slightly better. It has a easier time of testing and sort of upgrading these things. So let me show you how you could do a developer product in your tycoon. Now, there are a bunch of ways that we could sell an item. Okay, so in a lot of Roblox games, especially tycoons, there are two main mechanisms that you'll see for buying an item for Robux. Either it's going to be a physical button somewhere in the tycoon, like these dropper buttons, but instead of standing on it and using in game cash, you stand on it and you spend Robux and it will do something. So that's one mechanism of doing it. The other you'll probably see is with a client based GUI. So a graphical UI button somewhere that's sort of affixed to the camera, and it's there wherever you're looking and wherever you're moving. And you can click on one of those things in the client side, which will then prompt the server to buy the item. Now, in this video, because it has to be kept short and sort of we already have scripts for doing some of these things, I'm going to show you how to do it with a physical button. But I can come back maybe in a later episode and show you how we could use a client-side UI to do something very similar. But for now, we're going to have a physical button that you have to stand on in order to purchase your developer product. So how can we do that? Well, we already have some physical buttons, so we can just easily use one of these things. So let's take one of these buttons, let's duplicate it, and let's move it somewhere else in our tycoon. Let's put it over in that corner. This can be our Roblox purchasing corner. Okay, so we have a button here. Now we want to make it look different because this is not a button that unlocks part of our tycoon. Instead, it's going to be a Roblox button, a Robux button that you spend real Robux on to do something. Okay, so it's going to be slightly different. In fact, let's rename it as a Robux button so that we know it's a different kind of button. And in the same theme, we're not going to have it tagged as a button anymore. We're going to have it tagged as something else. We're going to call it a Robux button. That will be our tag. And it's because we're going to have a brand new script that controls all the Robux buttons in our game. All the buttons that when you stand on them requires Robux to buy something instead of in-game money. So we'll also not need this cost attribute, so we can remove that. We'll also not need this unlock ID attribute because we're not unlocking anything in the game. We won't need this item to buy either. So this is our Robux button that's model, okay? And we can sort of update it so Robux buttons look a bit different. Maybe we can do it, I don't know, a blue color, blue, purpley. You can decide. We'll have a nice purple there. And we'll make the the text UI look a bit different as well. Now, clearly you can spend a lot more time than I'm going to do on this. We'll have a sort of green color for the price and I guess a green color for the text too. So at least it looks a little bit different. And now we'll have script that will update these things dynamically for us. So when we duplicate these buttons, we don't have to come back here. But for our example, I will just change the text to like money and the cost. Instead of it saying $100, which sort of looks like in-game money, we will say 100 Robux, like row and then the dollar symbol. I mean R and the dollar symbol. So that is sort of the example Robux button that we'll have. Okay, so if we duplicate these later on, they'll all sort of look like this, which is fine because they're different to our in-game buttons that purchase part of the Tycoon. Okay, so we have an example button. Now let's add a new script to our server script service. And this one is going to control all of our Robux buttons. Okay, so we can rename this and we can call it Robux buttons. And it's going to work very, very similar to our existing buttons script. So we can copy this and we can paste it in here. And if you recall, whenever we do this, we sort of update some of these variables in here to have it apply to our new script. So we won't have a button model anymore. We'll have a Robux button model, which actually looks very similar, except we deleted the item to buy object value because we don't need that anymore. So we can delete that from there. It's not going to look at the tag for button. It's going to look at the tag for Robux button. And the same for all these button model sort of types. They are now going to be Robux buttons. And this collection service code will all work the same. It will look for all the Robux button tagged items and sort of call on added and on removed for each one. So let's shorten down to what we need for our on added and on removed. So on added will still add a touched event that we want to call with sending in the button itself and whatever touch does. And we still want these checks to sort of ignore stuff that is part of the template. So that looks good. And very similar in the on touched event, we still want to do the check for that the button is not deleted, that the owner is the one pressing the button, but we don't really care about in-game money or buying an item from our Tycoon. So we can get rid of that. So now we have a pretty simple, ready to start coding script that's going to control all of our Robux buttons. Okay? So what do we need to do in here? Well, essentially, when someone stands on the button, we need to sort of prompt Roblox to sell them something for real Robux. Okay? And the way that most of that stuff works is with a new service. So there is a different service, and you get it in the same way that you get the collection service or the player service. But this service is called the marketplace service. So the marketplace service here, which is what we're getting, local marketplace service equals game get service marketplace service. This is what does most of that interaction between our game and the Roblox backend server that sells stuff using Robux. And the way that it works is pretty straightforward. You basically call this marketplace service, and on there's a function. And in fact, there's a lot of functions, and they all begin with the word prompt. And if you're prompting for a developer product, so you want when someone stands on this button for them to buy a developer product, they would use prompt product purchase. If they're buying a Game Pass, it would be prompt Game Pass purchase. So we're going to focus on developer products right now. And you would essentially call marketplace service prompt product purchase because we want them to buy a developer product. You would send in then, and if I look here, it will show me the player instance of who's buying it. And we know this from our button script because it's the owner of the factory. So we can send in owner. And then what you need is a product ID. So an ID of something that you're going to sell. Okay, we'll send in 0 right now, just to make sure that this script is working. So if I was to play now, and we stood on the button, you would get prompted to buy a non-existent item, so it would probably throw an error, but it would prompt you to do something. The problem is when you buy something with one of our factory buttons, inside this helper's buy item sort of helper, we end up destroying the button, which means you can only really stand on that button one time, and then the button disappears once you purchase it. With developer products, we don't want the button to disappear, right? We want them to be able to stand on this again and again and again to keep purchasing whatever it is that we're selling. Okay? So we can't at the end of here say button.destroy because that will delete the button and then they'll never be able to do a purchase with that button again. So instead, what we need is a mechanism to debounce people touching this button. Now, we sort of talked about debouncing before in an earlier episode, but we didn't actually do it. So now I'm going to show you a couple of mechanisms for debouncing button presses like this so that if they stand on it once, it just triggers once. And if they stand on it 8 times, it just triggers once until they're finished. So it's pretty straightforward in that the pattern goes like this. If the button that we're looking at is already pressed, then just return early. Otherwise, you set pressed to be true because they are standing on the button. And then after some amount of time, you set it back to false. And how do we wait a certain amount of time? Well, you can do a task.wait and send in some number of seconds, so like 3. So this is a debouncing pattern that you'll see commonly throughout all sorts of documentation and tutorials. Basically, you check to see if something is already pressed. And if it is, you quit. And if it's not, you set it to be pressed. And then later on, you set it to be false after some amount of time. Which means if 5 of these things fire at the same time, the first thing will come in and say, oh, pressed is false. So we can go over here, set it to true, and then start doing something. And then that second one comes in and it says, oh, pressed is already true, so let's return early. Same with the third and the fourth and the fifth. And then only after 3 seconds is pressed set back to false. So the next one that comes in after those 3 seconds is allowed to do something. Now, obviously, in our script here, we're not just handling a single button. So this pressed event cannot just be a local variable. Sorry, that pressed variable cannot just be local because that would mean you could only press one button every 3 seconds. And we want to have this local to our button, even though our script is controlling a whole bunch of buttons. So we need to store something per button. And we're already doing that here with our button storage. Right now, inside the added script function, the only thing that we're storing in that button storage is the touched event. Instead, we can turn this into a table of things to store, right? And the first thing can be called the touch event, but we can also store a new thing here now, pressed, and we'll have that set to false to begin with, okay? And we'll need a comma in here because separate those two things. So now inside our button storage, for each button, which is this object that gets added, we store 2 things, a touch event and then whether or not the button has been pressed. And because we updated this button storage, we have to actually update it here. So button storage disconnect doesn't make any sense anymore, but touched event .disconnect does, right? Because we changed the way that this stuff is stored, you now disconnect the actual touch event itself inside that storage. And now buttons object has a pressed variable that we can sort of store per button. So we can go buttons dot button, because that's the name of it in this untouched function, dot pressed. And then we can set that one to true when they stand on it. And after 3 seconds, we'll set it to false for that button. So now this debouncing mechanism should work. You stand on the button, and even if you run around on it, you're not going to trigger the prompt more than once until 3 seconds has passed. Now let's get to actually purchasing something for real. Now, how can you do this? Well, there's a couple of mechanisms for adding a real item that you can purchase. The easiest mechanism for developer products, at least, is to going into your game settings. Assuming you've saved this to Roblox, you should have a game setting option that you can go into. And if you go down to monetization, at the bottom, you should be able to create a developer product. So your game probably does not have anything. I was testing it out earlier, so I have one. So you won't have anything, but you can press create from this UI and sort of have this developer product. So now we can edit that and we can sort of say, okay, this is the developer product item that someone will buy in our game. So let's give it a good name. What are we going to sell with our developer product? Well, I think for now, we will just give them a huge chunk of money, right? So we'll say chunk of money. That's what they're buying, and they can buy it for 10 Robux. You can obviously change your name and your price for whatever you're selling, but that's kind of how you do it. So you create one of those things, and then you have to go back into game settings because we need that ID that was just generated for our item. See that big long number there? That's the product ID that is unique for this particular product. You can click here and you can click copy ID to clipboard. Okay, that's going to give you that product ID on your clipboard so you can go back into your script and wherever you were trying to purchase something, you can type that in. So now, if I play the game, we should get prompted to purchase a chunk of money. So we can go over here, doopy-doopy-doo, we can stand on it, and it's going to say, hey, would you like to buy chunk of money for 10 Robux? Or we can cancel it. And it's important to note, while you're playing in Roblox Studio, this is a test purchase. Your account will not be charged. So this is really good because it means we can test out buying these things for Robux, but we're not actually going to get charged any Robux on our account. So we can purchase as many things as we like, and it's not going to actually charge us anything while you're in Roblox Studio. So just bear that in mind. This is free, even though it says 10 Robux, but that's only the case while you're testing. So there you go. We've prompted for buying a chunk of money. So that works. But one thing that you probably noticed in the UI is this never updated. It still says money and it still says 100 Robux. So we can fix that. The same way that in our button script, we sort of, when we go through and add the button, we update the labels. We can do that just the same for our Robux buttons. So when we go through and we add the button and we hook up all the stuff, we can update these labels. Now, how do we get access to that information for our developer product? Well, the marketplace service has another function on it called get product info. Okay. And you send in the same product info ID. Sorry, you send in the same ID that you want to get the product info for. And you also have to send it in an info type. And that's because this same function is used for products and game passes. So this is a product. So we'll say get the information for the product. Local info equals that. Okay. And then this is going to have a value on it. So there you go. The cost is going to be price in Robux, and the name is going to be info.name. Okay. And that should update it. It should ask the marketplace service, hey, what is this product ID? The product ID is chunk of money and it costs 10 Robux. Now, unfortunately, I forgot to update the dollar sign. So when we're selling stuff for Robux, we don't want to show a dollar because that's kind of what we did in um, our in-game money. Instead, we'll say R dollar, stands for Robux. Okay, so that should work. So that's good. We're looking up the product information the same way that we sort of updated these labels. We update it here automatically for us, and we can sell them. But right now, we sort of hard coded that developer ID directly into this. So all buttons that we duplicate are going to have the same ID. We don't want to do that. Instead, let's go into our Robux button and add a new attribute, set it to be a number, and this is going to be our Robux ID. So basically our developer ID or the Game Pass ID of the thing that we want to sell. We'll pass that in there, and then wherever we're using this right now, we can simply say, get the button, get attribute, and then Robux ID. Okay, so that will allow us to then customize this as we duplicate buttons around. And the same thing there, except in this function, it's called button. So that shouldn't have changed anything. It should still look up that ID, but now the ID is coming from the button, which means if you go away and you duplicate this, and you have a second one, you can sort of update this to sell your second item, and it will work. Okay? So we've prompted the user to purchase something, and the something is that ID that we sent. Unfortunately, we have no way of knowing right now if this product purchase succeeded or if it failed. Okay? So we need a mechanism for figuring out if they click cancel on the button, or if they clicked OK but didn't have enough Robux, or they clicked OK and they did have enough Robux and Roblox charged them and it all worked. So to figure that out, we're going to use a new script. We could add more functionality into our Robux button script, but there's probably other places in the game that will want to sell items for Roblox later, so we don't want to sort of muddy up this script. So we'll just create a new one. So we'll add a new server script service, and we'll call it something like Robux. I'm going to confuse those all the time. Robux purchases. Okay? I mean, you can name it whatever you like. Really, it doesn't matter, but as long as you sort of understand what it's doing. So this will be the script that handles all of our Roblox purchases that use Robux for us. So how do we know when a purchase has succeeded or a purchase has failed? Well, we're going to need access to the marketplace service because that is really where you figure out whether these things succeeded or not. And the way that you hook it up is there is a new property on here called process receipt. And this you basically set to a function that will get called whenever Roblox has successfully sold something for you, right? So you make a new function, and that function gets sent in just one thing, which is the receipt info right there. And from that receipt info, you can find out who bought what. And it's very much similar to what it's suggesting here. So essentially, the receipt info has a player ID on it. And you can figure out what player that is by using the players service. So let's grab the players service the same way that we grab our other services. Like so. And look up that player ID from the receipt using the player service. And if there isn't a player, then we're going to have to return early, just like we do in all our other guard checks. The difference about this process receipt one is instead of returning nothing or nil, when you want to quit and have the marketplace service, not spend any Robux because something went wrong, you have to return this special value, enum.productPurchaseDecision not processed yet. And there's only two values that you can return from this thing. Not processed yet, which means cancel everything, something went wrong, or purchase granted, which means it worked, and I've given them something in my game, so make sure the Roblox server takes away the Robux that are in their account. So not processed yet means something went wrong. So when you're returning early from this function, that is what you need to pass. Okay? So that's good. But now we need to figure out what to do when we get each different product. So right now we only have a single product, right? Which is that one item that we created. But you can imagine in the future, we're going to have a whole bunch. So let's figure out what the ID is for what they just bought. And the way that you do that is inside the receipt info, there is a product ID value. That is going to be the value of whatever item they just found, right? Whatever item they just purchased. Now we need a way of sort of saying, hey, if that ID is, whatever that really long number was, then do something. Else, if that ID equals something else, then, and it would be a really big set of if statements, if else, if else, if else, as we keep adding these products. Instead of doing it like that, most of the documentation you'll see for marketplace service basically has a table up here that uses those IDs as a key into the table. So if we go back to our Roblox button and we copy this, we can have that as a key in the table. And then the actual function that does whatever it's supposed to do when you buy it looks like this. Right? It gets sent in a player and it gets sent in the info of whatever you bought and it does something with it. Okay? And the way that you would look that up then is you would say if product table, so I guess it's products, if products ID, actually let's do a guard condition. If it's not in the table, then what do we want to do? We want to return early. And because this is something that we sort of control, whether or not this was put in the table, we can add a warning to ourselves that says, could not find product ID, and then whatever the ID is, in the products table. Did we forget to add it? So we'll add a warning to ourselves to sort of protect whether or not we've added a new button that's linked to a new item, but we forget to actually do something when they buy that item. Okay? So if that's not in the table, we'll give ourselves a nice warning in the output and we'll say, okay, quit early. Otherwise, we have to call that function. So you'd say product.product ID, and because it's a function, you can call it like this. We'll send in the player that we just looked up, and we'll send in that receipt info so they know, information about the purchase. Okay. And now we need to know if this worked. So we can say local succeeded equals that. And if it didn't succeed, if not succeeded, then what do? We return early. So if we get through all of that and we finally actually did something with the purchase, there was a correct player, the product ID was in there, all of that good stuff, then we can finally say to Roblox, yes, it worked. The purchase has been granted. So these guard checks again make sure that we're in the correct state when we get to the actual functional part of the script, but our functional part just says, yep, that worked. So now what do? Well, this product ID that we just added, we're going to add a comment here that we remember is chunk of money. So essentially, we can just add a bunch of money to them. If they purchase this item, they'll get a bunch of in-game money. Okay? So how do we do that? Well, we've already done something very similar in the seller's code, right? Money.value plus equals all of that good stuff when you sell it. We can copy that and we can paste it in here. So we don't have access to our helper script, which if you recall is that module script that sort of handles a bunch of sort of helper functions. So we can grab that the same way that we do here. We can require it. So now our Robux purchase script requires the helper script to run. And we can say helpers.getMoney for the player If there's not any money, then let's return false. And that will tell this outer call, uh-oh, it didn't succeed, so don't charge Robux. Otherwise, we're going to actually give them a chunk of money. So the value is going to be plus equal to, I don't know, what's a good chunk of money to sell for 10 Robux? 10,000 in-game money? That's fine. Then we'll return true. You could, of course, change this as you go. You could give it a different name. Instead of chunk of money, it's like 10,000 money or whatever. You can decide what the actual action is for each product. But the point is that we have this script that's going to control every single product that we sell. And the way that you would add another one is simply copying this, using the new ID that you got from creating that new product, and then giving it a different action. So maybe it's not money, maybe it's like a multiplier or something, but you can decide there with this same sort of mechanism. Okay? And that's pretty much it in terms of a developer product. We have a button now that when you stand on will prompt a purchase, and if they click OK and they have enough Robux, it will come in here and we'll run this script for this ID that will give them money. So let's test it out. We can play the game. We can see how much money we have, which is quite a lot because this every time I load the game and just talk, it's dropping more money in there. So we're going to have to make sure that it does go up a significant amount. We stand on this. If we press OK, we can see it went up to 72, right? And it was still like ticking over, so it's going to constantly go up. But you can see if I click cancel, it doesn't go up by 10,000 at least. But if I buy it, it does go up. So that is working. And that is how you could start earning a bunch of Roblox Robux in your game with developer products. Pretty straightforward. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, like and subscribe, leave a comment, ring that notification bell, all that good stuff, and I will see you next time.